Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. The start of a meteorological spring is imminent, but I've dug out a wintry jumper because it looks like there is some cold weather on the way. So with that said, I'll start by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 28th, the last day of the month. And it's very similar though to how things have been for a good while now. High pressure centred just to the northwest, a northeasterly flow moving down across most of the UK. It's bringing a few showers, particularly to central and eastern areas, and in the short term, very, very little changes. High pressure stays there just to the northwest, but then as we go into the weekend, it begins to move further northwestwards and change starts to happen. White shading here in the northeast of Britain, 21 GMT on Saturday, is indicating the possibility of sleet or snow showers. Colder air is starting to filter down as winds go into more of a northerly direction than they have been. In the days which follow, quite a wintry pattern starts to develop, but look at this little feature moving down from the north on Monday into Tuesday. It's an area of low pressure. It's bringing rain, sleet and snow. The reason why there's some rain mixed in with that is something I'll look at just in a moment, but on this particular computer model run, it moves down across the UK and then we're back into a cold or very cold northeasterly flow with sleet or snow showers in places by Wednesday the 8th. Here's the air temperature sequence associated with that GFS run. The blue shading over southern and central regions at the start indicates rather cold upper level air. The high pressure there, centred just to the northwest, and the green shading under it points towards higher temperatures at this level, which is about 1,500 metres above our heads. As I run this, as I said before, not much changes in the short term, but then through the weekend, this very cold plunge of Arctic air begins to move southwards across the UK, particularly into the northeast. But then the area of low pressure moves down from the north, and if you look closely there was a warmer sector associated with it, hence the possibility of rain and sleet rather than snow at times as it makes its way down across the country. If it does, then by the very end here, the cold air flooding in behind it once more. Quite a wintry picture there towards the end of the first week. Looking at the temperatures down at the ground level, so the ones we actually experience rather than those at 1,500 metres above our heads. These are forecast maximums 15 GMT, Wednesday the 1st of March, the start of a meteorological spring. Single figures across the UK, not particularly cold though. Moving forwards to Friday, if anything now it's a little bit milder. Double figures being shown there in the London area. But going forwards to Saturday morning, the nights are remaining quite chilly through this period. It really will depend on the extent of cloud cover, and by Friday, Saturday, there could be more breaks, and it's over risk of overnight frost increasing a little bit, even though the daytime temperatures may be somewhat higher as well. Values here on Saturday morning down to or just below freezing point in much of the UK, quite a widespread frost if it's correct. Then going forwards to Sunday, as that colder air begins to filter down from the north and northeast. Single figures once more in southern and central regions, 6 or 7 Celsius there being the tops, but noticeably colder in the northern half of the UK. And by Tuesday, that cold air is really moving down across all areas. There's that uncertainty, as I mentioned, about the area of low pressure, which will have that warmer sector embedded in it, but whether or not it's going to develop as the GFS shows is a different question, and the timing of it very uncertain as well. But single figures in southern and central regions here, 2, 3s, 4s, 5 Celsius maximums, cold or very cold in the north. So the GFS pointing towards a wintry pattern developing through the second half of the first week. And the MOGREPS-G Ensemble plot showing forecast temperatures for London, this is the UK Met Office Ensemble, is fairly much in line with what that GFS run was showing. In the short term, maximums, if anything, just trend up a little bit for a time, but then through the second half of the week, there's a downwards dip, and Towards the end there, the last few days, the amount of uncertainty increases. You can see the range of solutions starts to become significantly bigger. So forecast confidence falling away there to an extent towards the end. And just looking at the comparable plot for Inverness, it really emphasises that point, because all the runs are very tightly packed together through the first 4 or 5 days. But from the 4th of March onwards, there's a big spread there starting to develop, and there's 1 or 2 really extreme ones further down the line. Forecast maximums going up towards 10 Celsius on one of the runs, but most of them are dipping downwards quite sharply. There are some very cold ones in the mix there towards the end, so it does look like quite a wintry picture developing later on through the first week, particularly in the northern half of the UK, if this data and the GFS are correct. Looking at rainfall, days 0 to 5, not a great deal around according to the GFS, which is the plot on the right hand side, just 1, 2 or 3 millimeters. Some places remaining completely dry. Values on the ECM chart, the one on the left, are a little bit higher, particularly in the northeast. Maybe some heavier showers there filtering in for a time, but all in all, rain amounts quite low. Moving forwards to the 0 to 10 day period, the values have increased a little bit on the GFS on the right again, particularly in the northeast. On the ECM, it's a similar story. Values have risen, but all in all, neither of these look overly wet at this stage through the 0 to 10 day period. And through days 5 to 10, of course, there's a chance of some of the precipitation falling as sleet or snow. So, how do the deterministic models compare with each other towards the end of the first week? Here is the GFS, Tuesday, March the 7th. So the model run here, which the animation was based on. Both charts show forecast air temperatures at about 1,500 metres above sea level. The one on the left is the North Atlantic view with the UK under this blue circle. On the right, it's the zoomed in view. At this point, there's an area of low pressure moving southwards, and the less cold air embedded in it is shown by the light blue shading on this particular chart. Hence, as it moves down across the UK, a mix of rain, sleet and snow would be likely, but certainly in the southern half of the UK, I would expect rain to be favoured at this point. With that said though, there is much colder air returning behind it from the northeast. That's shown by these dark blues and purples. The Canadian model at the same time has colder air over all parts of the UK, the lowest values over Scotland. The German icon also looks cold at this point. The European ECM, a very cold northeasterly flow sweeping down. Low pressure there, centred close to Scandinavia. But just worth pointing over once more, the lowest upper air temperatures are in the north. Finally, the UK Met Office Global, a cold north or northeasterly flow, maybe the core of it a little bit further west, so somewhat less cold there in the southeast and East Anglia. But taking those runs together, the broad scale picture is very similar. It's quite a wintry one with cold air moving down from north, the northeast. Significant differences though in the details, and it's those which will determine the actual weather that we experience. In general terms, the risk of snow significantly higher as you head northwards, things looking a lot more marginal in the southern half of the United Kingdom. There could well be some snow around, but it may be more transient, sleety, and also a greater chance of rain at times. Still a wintry picture though, so does that continue as we head into and through week 2? As ever at this range, it really is all about trends and probabilities, so using the Ensemble data, and I'll start with the 16-day GEFS plot for London. Air mass temperatures on the top half. The signal early on is very clear. Most of the runs are well below the thick black line, which is a 30-year average. There are 1 or 2 going for a much milder scenario, but a strong signal for it to be cold or even very cold at this point. But as we head through the second week, the thick purple line, the ensemble mean, it's trending upwards and it crosses a thick black line for a time. So it becomes above average. Most of the runs there climbing above the average. But towards the very, very end, there is another dip there. So perhaps a sign that it would be turning somewhat colder once more. The precipitation on the bottom half of the chart is quite interesting. It's different to updates in recent weeks when really many of them have been like this through the 16 days, completely devoid of precipitation spikes. Not the case here. Today, quite a few spikes showing up through the second week, and with the cold air in the mix, it doesn't just necessarily point towards rain. Some of those could be suggesting snow. The snow row values at the very bottom provide some assistance. The maximum value of a snow row can take is 33. That would be if all of the runs which are plotted are showing snow falling in this location on the particular day. The maximum value it takes is towards the end of the first week, 14. But through the following few days, it's in double figures, suggesting maybe a 30 to 40% chance of snow falling in the London area. It doesn't mean accumulating, though I'll look at the possibility of snow accumulations later on. The air temperature data table for London makes things a little bit clearer. The purples are runs forecasting -4 Celsius or lower, and in brackets, 16% there, the highest it reaches is the number of runs which are forecasting temperatures at 1,500 metres above sea level to be at or below -10. It's often used as an indicator for deep cold in the UK, and because we're so late in the season now, well into March, it really does need that level of cold there for snow to fall and settle and not quickly melt away. For the first few days, though, the amount of purple decreases, the warming trend, which was clear on the graph, but then towards the end, a little bit more blue and purple starting to return, so perhaps a colder air mass coming back just at the very end. The 2-metre temperature data table for London, so the values down at the ground level. The dark greens are runs forecasted maximums of between 1 and 5 Celsius, and I think this data table really does highlight quite nicely how marginal things are, because even though we have a cold air mass through the first few days of the second week and towards the end of the first week there, it's only just over 50% of the runs which are going for forecast maximums of between 1 and 4 Celsius. There's lots of light green in there. Those are runs going for between 6 and 10 Celsius, and an increasing amount of yellow, the 11s to 15s, through that middle and second part of the second week. It's really because we're so late into the season now, into the meteorological spring, and as I'm trying to emphasise, to get those low temperatures down at the ground level in southern Britain, it really does need that deep cold air mass to be covering us. There can be some exceptions to that rule, but all in all, it is looking very marginal, I think, based on this data. Going up to Manchester, the air temperature profile very, very similar to the London one, and the precipitation spikes across the bottom also showing a similar profile. In actual fact, the snow row values there really very similar, maybe a little bit higher for a time, but all in all around a 30 to 50% chance of snow falling towards the end of the first weekend into the second. The air temperature data table for Manchester, very, very similar to the London one. If anything, the number of runs which are bringing that deep cold, -10 or lower, is slightly less. It's reaching a maximum there of 10%. The 2-metre temperature data table for Manchester, very, very similar to London. More dark green, I think, through the first couple of days, but not huge amounts more of it. Up to Glasgow, to the northwest of the UK, the air temperature signal through the first few days, very, very similar. A big negative anomaly, virtually all of the runs showing it. The ensemble mean then climbs, and on this chart, it doesn't go above the 30-year average. It trends back up towards it, but towards the very end there, it's dipping away once more. So the signal for it to turn milder in the north is weaker than it is in the south. So perhaps areas of low pressure may be pushing up from the southwest and bumping into cold air and becoming slow moving across the northern half of the UK. that would be a good scenario for significant and disruptive snowfall. But the precipitation spikes across the bottom are quite interesting because there's a similar number really to on the London and Manchester ones. If anything, perhaps for the first couple of days there are fewer of them. Also, look at the snow row values. They are quite low, surprisingly so. Although towards the end of the second week, they're still at 7 or 8 or 9. They're higher than in the south, but not very high. So perhaps even in the north, the chance of snow does reduce as we go through the second week, at least for a time, and particularly in the northwest. It could be a different story in the northeast. I'll come back to that just in a moment. The air temperature data table for Glasgow, it's a similar story. Lots of purple for the first few days, but the amounts decrease. Some green starts to show up, even a little bit of yellow. But if you look at the number in brackets here, 6%, that's lower than it was on the London chart. So only 2 runs, which is what 6% equates to, in the Ensemble at this point, showing 850 HPA temperatures at or below -10 Celsius in this part of the UK. Perhaps indicates that there will be a pool of cold air, deep cold air moving southwards, but then those air temperatures perhaps starting to pick up once again. The 2 metre temperature data table for Glasgow shows more dark greens than on the ones for the more southerly locations, but the trend is very similar. Also a little bit of light blue, a little bit blue there. Those are runs going for forecast maximums of between 0 Celsius and -8. Had to double check that. But those are ones going very cold, but just one or two on a few days there through the second week. A very low chance of ice days, and even here in the northwest. Looking at the 10-day GEFS surface level pressure mean, Friday the 10th of March, it would suggest the likelihood of milder air moving up from the southwest. It could still be staying colder in the north. And the ECM chart at the same time, similar, a greater chance of colder air across the northern half of the UK. And as I've hinted, that does lead to the possibility of a battleground developing, with rain turning to snow as it heads into the northern half of the country. The pressure data table, so these are going forwards through time rather than presenting a static snapshot, indicate lower pressure than has been the case for some significant time. The data table on the left is for London, on the right is for Edinburgh. Lots of green, still quite a lot of yellow. The yellow runs are generally close to the average or a little bit above it. Blues are lower and orange is higher. So the emphasis here is really close to average pressure through the second week, but that's lower than it has been for quite a long time. And if anything, the chart for Edinburgh has a lower pressure than the London one, which would suggest at least the likelihood of high pressure transfer into the south, the southwest, and weakening to the north. Cold pattern possibly breaking down, transitioning back from a negative North Atlantic oscillation set up to a positive one. I just thought it would be worth taking a quick look at the probabilities of lying snow, or at least the sort of general probabilities rather than specific, so I'm not going to give numbers here. The graphs both show lying snow from the GEFS runs. One on the left is for the next 16 days and it's for Berkhamsted. On the right, it's Cardiff. Not a great deal of difference. There are a few runs on the Berkhamsted plot there, so in the home counties, showing accumulating snow, but the majority do not. Similar story with Cardiff, although perhaps a greater chance of accumulating snow. Going northwards, so Manchester on the left, Sheffield on the right. There are more spikes on these charts than the previous two, but not a huge amount more. Finally, up to Glasgow on the left and Aberdeen on the right. There are more spikes here. The Glasgow one has a few more than the locations further south, but the big difference is the Aberdeen chart. There are far more spikes here showing accumulating snow than on any of the others. It points towards the greatest likelihood of snow accumulating being in the northeast of the UK. It fits in quite nicely because we're heading northward, so it's generally colder. And also with the flow being from north and northeast, this is the part of the UK which could well be catching some of the disturbances and the showers, hence the greatest chance of settling snow. Well, to summarise, there's quite a lot going on through the next 2 weeks. But week 1 starts off very quiet. There will be scattered showers in places, variable amounts of cloud, and that leads to the risk of patchy frost. Later on, it turns colder and the chance of snow increases, particularly in the northern half of the UK. Head southwards and it's more marginal. Week 2, it starts cold or possibly even very cold. Snow showers mostly in the north, the northeast, but there is the possibility of longer spells of rain, sleet and snow. Once again though, the greatest risk of disruptive snow is in the north, with conditions being a lot more marginal as you head into the southern half of the UK, especially over low ground. It could then turn milder, at least for a time, and more particularly in the south. A good deal of uncertainty though about how things will develop as you head northwards, and there is a chance of it staying colder there. So there we have it. It's looking wintry as we head into the meteorological spring. Significant snow? Well, I think the chance for the northern half of the UK, at least in parts of it, is high. Head southwards though, and it's a good deal more marginal. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see some snow in the south, but accumulations a lot more transient, slushy, mixed in with rain and sleet. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how things develop. And as ever, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons below. Thanks very much for watching now. Bye.